Hello, welcome back to another series of videos here for a thesis about intrinsic proofs. Now, we've talked a lot already about some preliminary ideas that are important, certainly kairos and stasis theory and common topics and commonplaces, and you put a lot of that learning together for your first big worksheet here. Sorry for the technical difficulties if you had some trouble with the PDF or the Word document. Hopefully by now you've figured out how to just use what we've got and make it work for you here so you can get your points for all the work you're putting onto it. Like I said, there shouldn't be a whole lot of other times when we need to do worksheets like that, but in the future, if we need to, we can probably find some more suitable venue for Google Forms or something to make it work a little bit easier for you. But that's okay. Sometimes in classes like this, you got to be flexible and adjust with the limitations of the situation. So thanks again for your patience as we continue to figure out how to make Google Classroom and these videos work effectively for you to learn the material and really have a successful year with your thesis. But as you said, you put all that together here for stasis theory and the preliminary ideas of commonplaces. Now we can start to focus on more concrete things here as we move fully into category 1 or canon 1 of ancient rhetoric, invention. The things that you want to say. How are you going to prove your point? What arguments are you going to create or use to really persuade your audience? Here, as you find the means of persuasion, as you said, is the essence of rhetoric. So, as you may recall, there are two basic categories of invention: intrinsic proofs and extrinsic proofs. The extrinsic proofs we'll talk about in a few weeks. That's basically research. What are the ideas, the background, the knowledge that people have said and contributed to this issue in the past, experts in their field, the testimony, data, scientific study, things like that. That is the research basically today that you're going to go out and find external to the argument. But first, we want to talk about intrinsic proofs, the kinds of things that you create yourself within the issue, whatever appeal, logical ideas, emotional appeals, personal background, experience, character, things that you have and can bring to this issue that you can create and draw on yourself, that you don't have to go to other experts to find out. These are the intrinsic proofs. So they're logic, the logos, the appeals to reason that we'll begin with here. Then we'll talk about appeals to emotion and appeals to character in the weeks ahead. So let's begin with logos, appeals to reason, appeals to rationality. As always, we'll start with a little bit of important background, make sure we have some of these terms clear, and talk about different kinds of ways that logic is built on probability and things like that. Then we'll, in a future video, talk about the two kinds of reasoning, deductive and inductive reasoning, try to get a good grasp of the differences there, which will lead into the 4 types of basic logical proofs that have been used for centuries, that you'll use here for your homework here for this logical proof task here. So those are the basic ideas that we're going to cover here in number 1, intrinsic proof number 1, appeals to logic. So, logos, where we get the idea of logic here today, is probably more familiar to you in, for example, like John chapter 1, right? In the beginning was the logos, which is there translated as word for the most part in most English translations, right? So the Greek concept of logos covers a lot to do with, speech patterns, the voice, but coupled with intellect and reason. The word, when John says in the beginning was the word, that's not just a sound, it's an intelligent being. And so the Greek concept of logos has a great deal of intelligence and intellect built into the way you speak and communicate. So it's an important, multifaceted idea. More often, probably, we are more familiar with the suffix of logos as like ology, like in biology or theology, right? The study of biology is the study of life, right? And so the ology more literally means words about, like the words about life for biology class, or theology, the study of or words about God, right? So an important concept that this is an intellectual sort of thing that you're about to do. The basic use of logical proofs, right? You can think of them as syllogisms, right? You begin with a premise, one statement, one idea. You add to it another one, certainly in the structure of a syllogism, or maybe add several premises to it, and from that you draw your conclusion, right? And we know that conclusions are usually true only if your premises are true. You might remember this from informal logic class and formal logic class from a few years ago. Right? But there are also, in the wide world of using logic, there are at least, four main kinds of argumentation. Number one, the scientific demonstration. You've done certainly quite a bit of that over the years in science class, right? If you can demonstrate it scientifically, logically, intellectually, many people will accept that as valid or true. Right? The world of the dialectic, as an argument using, compare, contrast, cause and effect, or as you may be talking about in Bible class already or pretty soon, an idea, a thesis, combating against its antithesis, which resolves in a synthesis, right? That is the essence of the dialectical kind of argumentation. One idea, another idea comes along, they combat and they work together. Maybe one side wins part of the argument, one side wins another part of the argument, and they resolve into a new synthesis, and which becomes a new thesis for another argument. That is the essence of dialectical argumentation. Right? And then where we are here in rhetoric, there are all sorts of logical proofs, as we'll get to soon enough. And obviously there's another kind of argumentation, just basically lying, which obviously we're going to avoid here for this class and these papers. And in your own life, obviously you're not going to use false or contentious reasoning to try to win people to your side, obviously. So we can skip that pretty easily. So those commonplaces that we talked about last time, as we said, you don't necessarily need to, or not necessarily should, spend a whole lot of time trying to convince depending on the situation, whether or not you really should spend the time convincing your audience that those are true or not. Sometimes these beliefs are so ingrained in their identity, you've got to work with them as the beginning part of your logical argument. And even if you disagree, or, certainly in an issue of, not necessarily biblical truth or morality, something like that, if it's just sort of a common preference that your audience really believes in that you don't like, you have to take that as the beginning part of your premise and use your logical arguments perhaps to sway them away from them. And you begin with those commonplaces in your logical argument. So this does build upon some of those ideas we've used already. Right? And so as often the case here in rhetoric, the differences of these kinds of argumentation, when you use them, when it's more important to use science or dialectic or rhetoric, really depends on the degree of truth that the arguers give them, depending on the situation. So again, as always, knowing your audience is an important aspect to this issue here. So a great deal of this issue of rhetoric and logic is built upon probability, right? And you remember from math classes, and maybe some of you are going to have taken statistics or will be taking it and sometime pretty soon. These are, in rhetoric terms, statements about human behavior, right? And you go from, as always, a spectrum from total random chance, you have no way to quantify it, to probabilities, maybe you can quantify it better, and to more certain realms of, yes, we know this is true, this is pretty much how humans behave, how it always will happen. We can tell not just a high degree of probability, but we are certain, that sort of thing. So there are different ways to quantify, human behavior, right? Some areas of life can be quantified. You've got a regular deck of 52 cards, you shuffle it up. You can, statistically quantify what are the odds of, after shuffling a regular deck of cards, what are the odds of drawing at random 4 red cards? You can numerically quantify that. Some areas of life and human experience you can't quantify quite so easily. We can try, but you can't always do them so precisely, right? You get in a car accident, you can sort of attempt to quantify, how upset will mom be, how upset will my dad be, you can't really get down to a numerical, well, I think, dad will probably be 37% more upset than mom or something like that, so I'll call mom first, just to let her know. You probably have a general idea of those things, but you can't really quantify them with quite as much, numerical accuracy. So knowing when you are dealing with probabilities and certainties can be an important issue in how you use your logical arguments, right? And the use of probabilities are based upon, as always, that some areas of human life are generally predictable, and we can understand humankind and their opinions, and again, dealing with human behavior, not necessarily human nature. We know, for example, weak people won't generally attack strong people. Once in a while, an aberration will occur, but it's the sort of general behavior of human experience that you think you can quantify, and how you try to prove your audience this is what you believe, so I'll generally try to lead them with these sorts of logical appeals or emotional appeals or whatever to get this result based on what I know of human behavior. Right? So there are 4 certain premises from Quintilian, and they're not so certain anymore, but they still have a fair amount of helpful truth to them, that he said that there's such a high degree of probability that we can basically always call them certain. Things perceived by senses, we all see them, hear them, we can know them through our senses. Obviously there are variations today with different sort of situations, of course, but in the classical world, this was held mostly true. Right? Things which is general agreement, we all generally agree that this is true. Like there's no reason to disagree, so that is a certain thing. Things that exist in law or custom, this is what we always do. Not necessarily understanding why we always do them, of course, but things that exist in law, this is the rule, the law of the land. This is a custom. This is what always happens on this particular event or this situation. We can call that certain. Right? Things admitted by either party to the argument, going through those stasis theory categories, right? If you can agree on conjecture, agree on degree, agree then maybe on quality, or starts to argue there. If both sides of the issue agree that this is true and certain, you don't have to depend on probabilities for that. Those are certain premises. Okay, not always so certain anymore, but these, for the most part, are often well considered fairly certain issues of human logic. Less so certain of the areas of probability, right? Things which involve what usually happens. Most of the time, we know this is how humans behave. This is what happens in a circumstance. The visiting team is going to behave this way. The home team and the crowd will behave like this. This is usually what happens. That's a high degree of probability. Those which are highly likely, again, not always quite so certain, but there's a good chance of it. Highly probable. Your logical arguments might be dependent upon probable things, and there's nothing to say that those are irrational. They're even a high degree of probability for your logical arguments in human behavior can be useful, or even the things in which nothing works against their probability, right? Like, can we go for a picnic next Thursday? Well, let's check the weather, my schedule, your schedule. I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't think, there's no reason why we can't. So that's a highly probable circumstance that you can figure out. Nothing works against its probability, so it's not quite certain. Like, I have to still check my schedule. You check your schedule. You never know what the weather is going to be like, but there's a high probability that we can logically agree that this is a true thing. So Aristotle says in closing, a statement is persuasive and credible either because it is directly self-evident or because it appears to be proved from other statements that are so. And that is, in this essence, the what logic is all about here, as we try to prove our points, create logical arguments, and just built upon that they are evident, like Thomas Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. These are things that are so obviously true. You just look at them, and with just a basic amount of human intelligence, you can say, yes, that is true. Whether it's certain or highly probable, those are things that we can agree to be true. Or maybe I don't quite believe what you're saying, but you prove that. You use other self-evident statements to really support what you're saying. Like, I don't quite believe your thesis, but if you have 3 or 4 really strong arguments and you defend them well, then suddenly you have used other statements that are self-evident to prove your thesis, and then your thesis itself becomes self-evident. So that is really the essence here of what we're talking about with logical proofs. All right. So thank you for listening to this introductory video. We will continue right on next with some more specific aspects of different kinds of inductive and deductive reasoning.